Welcome, everyone. It is a true delight to be with you here today. For those of you who don't know Elevate, I thought I would start with a brief introduction of who we are. We're the leading global network of funders who are focused exclusively on the well-being and rights of children and youth. Elevate Children Funders Group focuses on the most marginalized and vulnerable to abuse, neglect, exploitation, and violence. We take a holistic and whole lifespan point of view, looking at the whole child in the context of families, communities, and other political and social systems. ECFG members and funders more generally have increasingly recognized that child and youth participation is not only a child's right under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and a powerful tool for shifting power to the communities most effective, but it also contributes to their strategic outcomes, their goals, even for programs that don't appear on the face of them to address children and youth. But our members also recognize that despite a real surge in interest in participation and philanthropy more broadly, many funders still shy away from implementing meaningful participation across their work. Some don't understand its value, while others don't know where to start. There are many important questions that are raised about safeguarding, compensation, what's really meaningful. And others lack an understanding of the different ways that children and youth can be engaged in philanthropic organizations' work. Still others recognize that this work is really challenging and they're afraid to get it wrong, given the high stakes of working with young people, particularly vulnerable and marginalized groups. So when we came together in the ECFG Child and Youth Participation Working Group to discuss some of these issues, we realized that despite many excellent resources out there available for nonprofits and development agencies about child and youth participation, there were really few resources that spoke directly to the unique practical needs of funders. This guide aims to fill that gap. And I am so excited to be here today to hear more about the guide and its recommendations. Before we launch into the substance, however, I really want to acknowledge that this guide is a labor of love by so many people. It wouldn't have been possible without the hard work and dedication of just an enormous number of people. And we have the opportunity today to hear from many of these folks. So I'd like to offer first a huge shout out and thank you to the report authors, Georgia Booth and Ruby Johnson, and their research team, Ola and Trimita. To our amazing group of youth co-creators, many of whom you'll be hearing from today. To our advisory committee of experts in child and youth participation who helped guide this research, and to the ECFG Child and Youth Participation Working Group, who helped come up with the idea and design it and guide it along the way. This guide literally wouldn't exist without the talented design work of our amazing designer and ECFG team member, Zoe Trout, and our talented illustrator, Kritika Srinivasa, who made these absolutely beautiful illustrations that you'll see. And to all of the members of Elevate Children Funders Group who supported this work financially through your contributions and grants. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for making this possible. So with no further ado, I am happy to introduce the report authors, Georgia and Ruby. Georgia and Ruby, take it away.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks so much and welcome everyone. My name's Ruby. So as Heather shared, I'm one of the authors and part of this team on this fantastic toolkit. I'm just really excited to be sharing some of the high level, a little bit about, the intention and the methodology and what we found today. And yeah, just to say also thank you, huge gratitude to the Elevate team. It's been a joy to work on this and I feel like something that's been in the works for a long time and just really, really complementary resource to different existing things that are out there. So really happy to be able to share. So maybe Zoe, do you want to pull up our slide deck? Thank you. I hope you like my green background. I was debating whether it was too much, but here we go. I'm like embracing nature. So thank you. Perfect. So just to share a little bit about the methodology. So we kicked off as Heather shared, sort of key conversations with the Elevate team and membership. We also then undertook a literature review with different reports, articles, research, and as well as some internal sort of documents, reports, and existing resources from funders in the Elevate membership. and we conducted a number of interviews. We really tried to, with funders, so really also looking at trying to have a diversity of funders, so ranging from women's funds, private foundations, public foundations, sort of across the children and youth space, as well as different approaches to funding. So in the interviews and in sort of the entire inquiry, we also had focus groups with children and young people, and we did this really with the guidance of the advisory group that Heather mentioned, and external experts, and really with this children and youth participatory working group and the youth co-creation group. So there were a series of interventions and ways that we did that. And we also obviously drew on our Georgia and the team, Ola and Chumita's experience in sort of youth-led participatory practices across from grant making to sort of organizational work, so we can share more. And I think maybe just to say that I think this toolkit, it offers a lot of really practical guidance, and we tried to really make things that you could use in the day-to-day of implementing and learning in sort of youth and children participatory processes. But it needs to be sort of adapted to country context and to country and different cultural needs. It's sort of I guess a blueprint or some things that can guide you in your practice, but how you bring that to life and sort of learn as you go will be like really critical. So the intention is to sort of bring together all of these existing resources, share some guidance, and then people can sort of take that and adapt it. I'm going to pass over to Georgia. Thanks, Georgia.
Thanks, Ruby. And hi, everyone. If you could go to the next slide, please, Zoe, thanks. Yeah, just so excited to be here with you all and sharing this piece of work that we've been creating together since February, I reckon, but dreaming it up long before then. And when we started designing the process, it was really clear that there was a need for a section on making the case, not just how to do meaningful child and youth participation, but why funders should support meaningful child and youth participation. And through the desk review and the survey and the workshops, we found that it can be a really powerful and invaluable catalyst for change and impact at multiple levels. So not only is it children and young people's right to participate in decisions that affect their lives, and I think this is a really important starting point, but whether you start small or big, you'll see a positive impact. So for example, at the personal level, it builds confidence, empathy for others, and personal self-esteem. From a philanthropic perspective, meaningful participation and particularly co-ownership over a process and a piece of work not only leads to more impactful grant making programs, but it really transforms funders' attitudes and practices. It has the potential to break down patriarchal and colonial structures, and it shifts power within the broader funding landscape as well. What I found particularly exciting is that it leads to stronger movements because it creates room and space for solidarity and coalition building. And it contributes to more democratic societies by encouraging processes like voting and consensus building. And so children and young people who participate in these types of processes are more likely to be interested in engaging as citizens outside of them. And there's some really compelling evidence for all of this within the toolkit. And there's a section of the toolkit which has all this that you can download separately from the main document for those that want something kind of short and snappy for their leadership, for their boards. It has quotes and statistics. So something, again, just very practical to bring the findings to life. So I do encourage you to go and read the toolkit, and it does start with a lot of the findings from the research, which are too many to share in detail here, but we're going to share some, little bits. So Zoe, if you could go to the next slide. Thanks. So we've grouped them into 4 areas. So as I said, we're not going to go into each one in detail, but we're going to lift one up from each bucket that we found particularly either interesting or kind of controversial and sticky and challenging. So Ruby, over to you for the first one.
Thanks, Georgia. And Diana, I'm just seeing your comment there. The team will be dropping something in with the link with the toolkit. Thank you, Heather. So I think why participation is important. I feel like a lot of the people that are here on this call already are somewhat convinced, and Georgia's sort of touched on, really the key sort of evidence base around why it's impactful. Obviously, the fact that it's, a human right of children and young people to participate in decisions that impact their lives. And there's, some really great evidence that it leads to stronger outcomes. I also wanted to touch on why it's not always a good idea, which is ironic. But I mean, I think just to say in the terms of supporting movements, I did just want to underline this point Georgia raised already, but that we have seen some really important through our research, but also through our own sort of practice, my experience of working with Frida for a number of years, and then working with different feminist funders, in particular, participatory practices where you're bringing together or finding ways for activists to understand each other's context and each other's work, and actually, as Georgia said, sort of building that solidarity and opportunity for people to have critical connections can really support sort of ongoing strengthening of movements and sparks to be made by actually connecting people up. So there's a powerful sort of opportunity to strengthen and support movements to strengthen. In addition to that, though, I just want to flag that I think it's really important not to depoliticize participation. So I think we've seen in the last 5 years, even really in the last few years, that participatory grant making in particular is sort of, kind of new thing on the block, and many funders are embracing it in a fantastic way. And Diana and some of the others who have been doing this work for a long time will relate to this, but that it's so important not to see that purely as a sort of a process that is technical, but really a political process that is around sort of sharing and shifting power, and that there's a real chance to rebalance power and agency and decision making for young people. So it is a really deeply political process, but participation for the sake of participation is not always the right thing to do, and without intention and resources can actually be harmful, or it can actually sort of deepen existing tensions or power, or sort of consolidate power within movement and within various contexts. So being really intentional with why you do it, how you do it, the approach with which you do it, and sort of taking the time that it might need is, from our experience, been really, really important. It also, I guess, the assumption that not everyone wants to participate, I think, is in different ways and varying levels of time, but also interest sometimes, that always finding ways to open conversations with young people, children and young people that you're working with, to see if the type of participation you're proposing makes sense, to co-design with them where possible. In my own experience, I found some people really want to participate in many ways and be part of governance and decisions, and others just want to receive like flexible resources for their work and have varying, time and commitments already. So just, I guess we wanted to mention, yes, participation is incredibly important, but that we should still have a really intentional approach and open conversation about like what that participation looks like with children and young people. Over to you, Georgia. Thanks.
Thanks, Ruby. So the second bucket you can see there is the foundational elements of meaningful child and youth participation. And the one I want to pull out of here is compensation, which was such a fascinating and live conversation, but also kind of a sticky and challenging one. And so we truly believe, I think even before we've started this work, but particularly now through the research process and what we've heard from young people and what we've learned from others, is that compensating children and young people for their time and expertise is not only fair, it's a necessary condition for equal and inclusive engagement. And while most funders are now aware of its importance, very few have a clear or consistent policy. There can be pushback from senior leadership given the risk in monetizing traditionally unpaid volunteer roles, and many face internal procedural challenges which prevent them from compensating young people, especially children, and especially financial compensation directly, because we are talking about financial and non-financial. When broaching the subject of compensation for under 18s, there are additional safeguarding challenges and potential legal obstacles with moving resources to minors in some contexts. Or just practically, thinking about who has access to a bank account. And so there's a need to think creatively about this. And as I mentioned, it's not just financial compensation, but also non-financial. And this was pulled up particularly important by young people. particularly in the Global South, the value of trainings, of networking opportunities, accessing decision makers or decision-making spaces, and also just providing references and recommendations. These are all examples of good practice that we heard. We really heard the need for people for template policies or specific recommendations. You should do this or you shouldn't do this. This is the amount you should compensate. And we thought about this a lot, and it isn't that simple. It's a new area for many. And the best thing that funders can do is speak to children and young people about what's fair, share what they're testing and what they're learning with other funders so that we can start to learn from each other. And in the toolkit, there is a dedicated section with practical guidance and some tips and considerations. And it includes a link to a new scoping paper that was commissioned last year, which I'm really, really excited is in here. And that will be a really good starting point for people. It includes principles and a decision-making tool for organizations to develop their own policy. Back to you, Ruby, for the next.
Thanks, Georgia. Yeah, and as you can see, we tried to really weave in other existing resources for people, so very intentional. So the third point around key shifts to be made internally. So, for this starts in many ways, we found that starting from a place of authenticity and being honest and kind of, I guess, just real about your limitations as a funder. And on the one hand, this is around, might require some internal reflections, understanding of biases and beliefs, even if they're unconscious, understanding. Also, many young people face a lot of discrimination for their, different identities, as well as just being a young person experiencing sort of adultist, not being taken adultist sort of culture and behavior, not being taken seriously, and just facing multiple and intersecting oppression. So being really conscious of how your organization might be actually sort of re-traumatizing, triggering or opening space for people that, not realizing the impact of that. So some important conversations around mindset, around attitudes, around, what might be there that you haven't even unpacked around power dynamics inside an organization and individually as well. We thought was something that came up a lot that is important to consider, as well as sort of broader structural recognition and sort of acknowledging that philanthropy in itself is really built on, deep historical and ongoing inequalities, exploitation, and sort of colonial history, this sort of unequal power distribution is something that is just a reality in our work. So trying to be really mindful of that, and finding ways to move forward, but with acknowledging that the contradiction that it is. And sort of, I think part of that is also reflecting that it's not a privilege for us to fund young people, but it's, it is a privilege for us to be able to fund young people. And it's not that, this idea of beneficiaries, but really moving beyond that, of agents of change, and that this is redistributing wealth that needs to be redistributed. So that's critical. I think knowing your accountability lines and staying true to them. So again, being honest about what you can and can't do, but really trying to sort of work internally to shift and change and be deepen accountability to young people. This might require rethinking internal communications as well, and approaches. So when engaging and working more closely with children and young people, and there's some great examples in the toolkit of how different people have been doing this, how funders have been trying to make really, inclusion and accessibility central to working with diverse young people, including, working with adolescent girls and adolescent children. And yeah, I think I've sort of mentioned this, but really recognizing the intersecting identities and, which young people you're working with, looking at inclusion, and really making sure that you're not maybe going just to the same people that are always on advisories, but looking beyond that, and making sure that your processes are really accessible. So, and how your organization or institution really centers that in the way you reach out and work with young people. Over to you, Georgia. Thanks.
So yeah, so for the last one, there are several obstacles, of course, and the one I want to pull out here is around the additional considerations for working with under 18s. So it would be remiss not to mention the tendency of funders that we reviewed for the research, or spoke to for the research, there is a tendency to work with slightly older young people, over 18 or even in their late 20s. Not always, but it was a tendency. And this is often because of very valid safeguarding concerns, which are heightened, I'd say, when moving money to adolescents. And there are mixed opinions that we heard about when to obtain parental consent for political work that they might not be supportive. Again, we've pulled together some very practical things, including safeguarding policies from different types and sizes of funders and some different approaches in there. In many countries, there are also, as I mentioned before, legal restrictions when transferring money. However, it isn't impossible. Several funders and NGOs have worked with girl-led and youth-led and centered groups to move funds safely and provide the additional accompaniment and support needed to manage that money. And it does require extra time and consideration, specific expertise. Many of these groups are very informal. They might not necessarily have a group bank account or anything like that. So it requires thinking a little bit differently and a lot of flexibility. We also found through the research another related obstacle. I kind of grouped it together for the purpose of this webinar. A related obstacle to working with children is a bit of fear about getting it wrong or not having the expertise specifically for working with under 18s. And so where organizations are supporting really meaningful participation with children, they've hired people, often young people, but not always, often youth workers who have deep experience in facilitating child-centered methodologies. And so we want to call out, this is an area of expertise, and it's important that if you to support this meaningful child participation, that's recognized, right, and resourced and hired. Those funders have also provided ongoing training on safeguarding, on participation, on power and privilege and bias for staff across the organization, not just with teams that are in direct contact with children. So this means as well that the finance team or grants team is also experienced and ready to move money to adolescents or to engage with them and their families or with local partners if that's what's needed to engage those groups. So yeah, or they're willing to invest that time to build that capacity if it doesn't exist in broader teams. So while it poses new challenges, there are really some wonderful insights and learnings from others on how to do this safely and meaningfully. So I'd encourage you to go and explore those. I believe now we're going to actually show you the sort of model itself. So Zoe, if you could go on to the next slide. Awesome. I think we were going to do a poll, but we're over time and we want to make sure we've got time in the breakouts. So this is the tapestry of participation, which I'm so excited to share with you all. And this is half of it. You'll see the other half in a sec. But this brings me so much joy to share and was so much fun to be part of its creation. So the tapestry offers a collective process to weave a shared story together, co-creating something beautiful that will last for generations. This is the idea behind the tapestry. And the idea is that it's unique depending on who comes together to create it. So I want to invite the wonderful creator, the designer of this, Kritika, to come on and just introduce herself and share a little bit about her contribution as a creative and as an artist as part of this team and who brought this incredible work to life. Are you there, Kritika?
Thank you so much, Georgia. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I first of all love to thank the Elevate team for having me on board. It's been such a delight and pleasure to work on this. Just to briefly introduce myself, I'm a lawyer who's turned into an artist, and I currently work with fabulous creators like Georgia, Ruby, and Zoe on projects like this. And this one in particular was really challenging and really interesting to work on, because when I was introduced to the project, the draft was already in place, but there were a lot of fine tuning that was still going on. And I think I'd love to go back to what Georgia mentioned about there were so many things that were still in the works, and we sort of approached it with both doubt as well as excitement as to how to go about certain aspects of the illustration. Just for instance, when we were talking about compensation, just how we depict something that is somewhat ambiguous and yet something we are navigating ourselves was something really challenging, and depicting that visually without making it simplistic, like just, representing a dollar sign or something, was a very intentional sort of step that we took together as a team. So I'm so grateful to have had a team like Zoe, Ruby, and Georgia, just to bounce ideas off of each other. And just something really interesting that I kind of figured out along the way is sort of using a collage process to sort of talk about things that are done not from scratch, but by using each other's sort of methodologies, by using each other's creation, depicting young people of various ages, of various ethnicities and backgrounds to sort of come together and create something really beautiful with a lot of differing visual elements was something I really enjoyed, because collage is something that I tried out for the first time for this project. So I'm so happy. And just to end on a really, really interesting note, while I was working on it, I sort of called a child who lives near my house. And I just asked him, what does this look like, right? Because I kind of wanted to make sure I'm on the right track with what we were depicting. And a lot of the adults I had asked before, they said, yeah, it's a quilt, they're just making like a nice quilt, it's a blanket, it's a bed sheet, whatever. And the child looks at this and he says, without even thinking, he said, that's an elephant. And I'm just like, what are you saying? How is that an elephant? And then he shows me like the trunk of the elephant, which is on the top left, and the rest of the body of the elephant. And that really got me thinking as to, just like this methodology, like you never know what you're going to end up with and how it's going to look like to other people. And everyone might just take away different conclusions from it. So I really enjoyed that conversation. And I don't want to be over time because I know that there are a lot of interesting breakout rooms happening after this. But I'd love to hear what you think about the quilt or the elephant. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I love that. Yeah, this is just so fun to create and make with you. So thank you. And thank you for joining as well. So yeah, so this is, as I said, half of the model. And this, or if you go back to the first one first, Zoe. So the research and desk review surfaced a 4-step process, I'd say, to designing a participatory approach. The first is the grounding principles as the foundation for participatory practice, and I'll talk about those in a minute. The second are 4 levels of participation within an organization. So whether that's, actually you could go on to the next, Zoe, for this bit, thank you. So the next is, the 4 levels of participation. So either at the organizational or operational level, programmatic and grant making, influencing, and then monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And these have associated entry points and participatory mechanisms, and Ruby will talk about those in a second. Then the third step is to decide which children and young people you're working with based on who is in your networks. That might be groups that you have a direct link with, and it might be through other grantees, or it might be broader. And number 4 is the 4 depths of participation, which we've identified through this as consulting, shared decision-making, more deep co-design, and then also just direct resourcing of child and youth organizing is kind of almost the ultimate form of participation. And you can read more about these final 2 steps in the toolkit. And so the model layers one on top of the other, tailored to the institution and how they're currently are working or how they wish to work with children and young people. So I just want to talk a little bit about the principles first. Maybe if we go back to the slide before. So these principles came out through the research process. So the first is that it's a process, not a project, not a one-off. So even if you start small, it's really important that you have the resources, the time and the commitment for it to be meaningful, and not saying like, all right, we've got a month, let's see if we can, you know, run a participatory process to design a project or something. The second is co-ownership. So providing opportunities for real influence over part or all of the process. The third is that it's safe and consistent, doing no harm and mitigating any potential risks to children and young people. The fourth is that it's inclusive, so centering inclusion from the beginning, and working to create the conditions for diverse children and young people to participate and lead. The fifth is that it's intersectional, recognizing the diverse and intersecting identities and realities of children and young people. The sixth is that it's non-extractive and it's compensated, so valuing people's time, expertise, and contribution, being really clear about your intentions for where their contributions are going, and building in feedback and recognition throughout the process. The seventh is that it's experimental and iterative. So again, building in enough time and flexibility for ongoing learning and adaptation. The eighth is bravery and openness. So being ready to have uncomfortable conversations, taking calculated risk, and being open to vulnerability. The ninth is holding power to account. So recognizing children and young people as political actors, as Ruby mentioned earlier, and embracing the systemic change you have to do as well. And last but not least, that you are intentional and patient. So having a really clear plan and building, again, I'm like repeating myself, but building in the time to do it properly. And in this section, in the toolkit, there are examples of what participation looks like with and without these principles, just to sort of to provide some ideas for reflection. And there are practical activities and questions for funders to think about in their teams, with the principles as the absolute starting point for developing their approach. Ruby, I'll hand over to you now to talk about the entry points and the types of participation.
Thanks, Georgia. And we can go to the next slide, if possible, Zoe. Yeah, and just again, big respect and appreciation for Kutika, who's able to bring together what tend to be quite dry or things into pure beauty. So yeah, thank you. Really appreciate the intention that you put into all your work. So I'm not going to go into huge detail because we have different speakers and breakout groups, and wanted to make this session participatory and obviously center young people more. So we're going to be brief, but I just wanted to go through a little bit of some of the different entry points and participatory mechanisms that are here. And so I just would say that within each of these, there are kind of quite a lot of detail, considerations and examples and case studies and other resources you can go to. So there's like quite a lot of very practical things you can draw on, but just in a brief moment. So under the sort of organizational strategy and operations, as Georgia shared, there's various ways that you can sort of deepen participation. One of them is actually bringing young people into your organizations. So hiring young people and creating the organizational structures and programs, policies, and culture that ensures they can actually have influence and are not sort of there as, the token young people or that they can actually, they have the wraparound support to really thrive in an organization. So, thinking carefully about what existing power structures might be there. What are we spoke a bit about this before, like what needs to change internally, but like some really honest reflection of what that is, and then having open dialogue with the young people of how they're going and what needs to change, and supporting them to have some actual influence and decision making to shift and work with different leadership and be in leadership to do that. Young children and young people on boards and advisories, and again, there's like a wealth of experience and kind of examples shared within the toolkit on this. And I think it's I'd say an emergent area where there's just continuing need to share across different funders. So how to sort of create, again, this kind of enabling environment, a space for learning and sharing in ways that are not extractive. Really, the compensation piece has come up. Obviously, there's limitations within boards in a formal governance role. In some organizations, a lot of funds can't compensate that role, but really thinking carefully about what kind of needs to be in place to ensure that they can meaningfully participate. And that might be things as simple as, data for their phone, the timing of meetings, rotation, right through to sort of what additional training and support they might need. And, even things like coaching. We've seen some great examples where organizations are sort of taking additional steps to make sure the organization and the boards and advisories are really inclusive and joyful for people to be part of. Another great example of this we've seen in like strategy processes where young people are consulted, but not only consulted, but co-designing or sort of deeply involved in the process. So, and we've actually seen in the toolkit, there's an example of a private foundation. So I think, not being limited by the fact that you're a very large organization or a large fund, but finding ways to, go that extra mile to support young people to influence decisions around your strategy. So there's some great examples, grant making. So in the toolkit, we did, again, look, as Georgia mentioned, we looked at actually moving resources to young children and young people as sort of the ultimate way to trust their leadership, and the ways that you do that and how you move the money being really political, but also participatory grant making. So, and there's some good examples there. And, there's, I think, a lot of experimentation happening across the philanthropic space with different funders and trialing different things right through from, different advisories and peer-led processes through to online voting and, bringing young people together and really, I think, honoring the context and the opportunity for young people to connect with each other and to deepen relationships through participatory practices. So I think there's some great examples there covered in the toolkit. But I think, my feeling is it's such a moment of continued sharing and learning. So, sorry, it's like a plane going over here. Pause for a moment. Yes, and I'm just going to wrap up in a moment. I think just to say that I love the fact that Krutika used the collage and experimenting with new methodologies, but also for me, it's sort of a metaphor of what this toolkit is. But I think where we're at in sector of like trying different things, sort of supporting each other to learn and really centering young people and, children and young people and girls in my work particularly to actually be driving that practice-based learning. So critiquing models, looking at what can be, changed the next time around, and sort of really pushing funders and institutions to deepen some of their, to walk the talk and to deepen some of their practice. So it actually really kind of centers young people. I think I wanted to go into all of them, but I just really want to be mindful of time. I don't know, Georgia, is there anything you wanted to add about any of the other entry points before we sort of move on to the next part? I just want to pass it to you in case there's anything.
No, I think just to say that they interconnect really beautifully, and there's a lot of, you start one and it leads naturally to another or inspires another, and that connectivity I think is really interesting and came through a lot through the research. But yeah, I think sort of go and explore and so that we can, I think we're going to move on to the youth panel. But I think other than that, I think it's a great summary.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and we just want to spotlight a few, but I think also just to say that we tried to cover the ones we've seen and that have come up across the membership of Elevate, but there may be others. So like really inviting everyone to continue to share like what's working, what's not, and sort of pushing us all to think more holistically about participation as well, and around sort of, I think when you're working more closely with young people, like the possibility for just to rethink and reimagine the ways we're working entirely become possible. So we're going to stop there. Please check out the toolkit, obviously, and we welcome any feedback. And I'm actually now going to pass it over to Giovanna. So Giovanna is part of the Global Fund for Women Adolescent Girls Advisory Committee, and also was a really key part of the youth co-creation group in designing this toolkit and really guided us on all of the work. So thank you, Giovanna, and over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Giovanna. I am a 20-year-old gender activist from Brazil, and I'll be moderating the panel. And just to answer the first question myself, before I introduce the other panelists, the reason why I wanted to participate in this toolkit is because philanthropy in my country has a really terrible connotation. And I really wanted to understand how I can make other people understand what feminist philanthropy is. And I've been working for this for for 3 years now. And it's just so interesting how we can have girls as part of the Adolescent Girls Advisory Council actually grant money and use money and see that money is a really important tool for independence. And so for this panel, we have invited 4 panelists. I think one of them is not going to be able to come, but we have Taibat. She is the founder of the Rising Child Foundation. We also have Pauline, which is the executive director of the Girls Heart Alliance. Thomas, which is the executive president of the Mono River Youth Network. And Solomon, I think he's not going to be able to come, but he was the chair of the Global Fund for Children's Youth Leadership Council. I'll let them introduce themselves. So Taibat, if you want to please introduce who you are, what you do, as well as experiences that you have had with participation in philanthropy that led you to want to work in this toolkit.
Thank you, Giovanna. It's really a pleasure to be here today for the launch. And in addition to being a member of the Youth Co-Creation Group, I am a research consultant from Nigeria, and I hold a Master's in Development Economics from SOAS University of London. I've always been very interested in research and advocacy to actually influence policy decisions affecting children and young people. So when I saw this opportunity, I knew I wanted to be part of it because just like someone stated, when you bring up the issue of why are there not, much young people participation in the grant making ecosystem, it talks about there is no evidence to back it up. So it's actually very interesting to see that now that we have the evidence, what is going to happen. So I'm actually looking forward to that and to also seeing more people use this toolkit as part of their advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Taibat. Pauline, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us the experiences that you have had with philanthropy? I don't know if Pauline is here. If not, we can just go to Thomas. If Thomas want to go and introduce himself, that would be amazing. Okay, I think that everyone is here. It's just Taibat today. Well, that's good. So Taibat, this is going to be a really interesting interview. Thanks so much for joining us. I do have another question to you, if you don't mind. So we have been talking a lot about funders and recommendations and things that we can improve. And so I was just wondering if you had one recommendation for funders, just one, based on the advice in this toolkit, either overall or just one small thing that would like to give an advice to, what would it be and why?
I think it would be to be, to be intentional with, adopting the principles and recommendations from this particular research, because youth participation is not something new. We've been hearing these involve the young people, involve students, but sometimes, organizations just do it to check some boxes. So I think I would like to see more funders being intentional, being deliberate, and also consistent in actually involving young people in their process, throughout their process, not just, having them there as to tick a box. No, but being intentional from their planning stage to implementation throughout the whole process. Then I think being intentional and being consistent is very key. So I would love to see more funders, being more intentional and deliberate about involving students and young people in their grant making ecosystem.
Thank you. And when you say about being intentional, it reminds me of letting go of control. And this is something that I am learning as well, because I love to be in control of everything in my life. But the thing is, I also noticed that it's better to be someone who believed in somebody else than someone who didn't. So I think that if you just give a vote of confidence to young people, you're going to see that they can do amazing things. Because at the end of the day, we, the youth, is going to be the people who are going to inherit this world. So we might as well just take a bit of control to ourselves and just believe in it. And so thinking about that, and the toolkit, How can the toolkit support advocacy for a more participatory and equitable funding ecosystem by children and youth-led groups? What's your opinion?
Thank you, Giovanna. While the primary audience of this toolkit is funders, I strongly believe that it can also serve as an effective advocacy toolkit for young people as well as civil society organizations, with the goal of generating dialogues and also increasing funders' commitment to a more participatory funding ecosystem. Because just like I've said before, and I think someone also raised that in the chat box, when you engage funders about the process, about their grant making ecosystem, they frequently just argue that they do not understand the issue, or that there is no data, or there is no evidence to speak to it, or that they do not know how to address the issues. Now we have the evidence. Here is the toolkit. So, and it is holistic and comprehensive in itself, and touches on these concerns. So I believe it's going to provide useful recommendations to help funders make informed decisions. And it just also boils down to the young people as well as the civil society to not just, just to take ownership of it, to adapt the recommendation to their varied, context, situations, and use it in their own advocacy. To get more funders to commit to involving young people in their participatory practice.
Thank you. And just, I just got the news that Thomas is finally here with us. So if he wants to please just introduce a bit of like his experiences that he have had with philanthropy and introduce himself. If Thomas, please, the floor is yours. Please let him be here. I know, I guess it's just internet connection issues happened to me this morning.
Yeah, hello.
Hello, Thomas, welcome to this panel. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah. Okay, I'm Thomas Kisley Justice Levy. I'm the executive president for the Mano River Youth Network. Sorry for my internet was, I was having issues with the internet.
Well, thank you for coming. And I just wanted to ask you, like, what are the experiences that you have had with participation in philanthropy that led you to want to work on this toolkit?
Come again?
So the experiences that you have had that like helped you want to participate in this toolkit.
Yeah, of course. In terms of funders' response to young people's participation, especially adult-led organizations. Because I've got a lot of these experiences. I've been part of platform where donors have, and I've been part of participating platforms such as the Takura platform. But
sorry, no. Oh,
participation.
Wi-Fi is on.
It has actually been more of a symbolic view in terms of participation than thorough youth participation. What I mean, like young people actually making their decisions. So when we talk about my experience in terms of, my experience has actually triggered me to actually see how we can make this a meaningful participation. So in 2019, I've actually been part of, we advocated for the Takura grants making platform to see how young people can actually also, be part of a grant making platform, make decisions on actually giving out grants, and also see how, they can own the grant by themselves, implement the grant without influence from adult-led organizations. The experience was quite good, but it was the first trial in Sierra Leone. It has a lot of challenges. I tell you, a lot of funders or adult-led organizations found at a meaningful youth participation. In as much as you want to talk about it.
Can I just ask you a follow-up question, if you don't mind? Do you have any advice or any recommendation for funders? Just one, like very brief. What would you want them to do right now?
Just one recommendation is for funders to focus more on making youth participation meaningful by actually seeing that the manual is more practical at structural level and at program level. We have the Funders Toolkit now, we are launching it today. So if this toolkit can be more practical at structural level and at programs level, it will be essential to meaningful youth participation.
Makes sense. And Taibat, if you don't mind me asking just one more question to you. Is there anything else that you would like to say? There's maybe something missing, something that funders should know right now, that's something that you thought about it after you finish a toolkit. What is just something you really want to tell them? This is your moment.
Thank you so much. I think the toolkit itself is comprehensive and holistic, and it touches on almost all funders concerned. So it's left to them to actually commit to it, to also tailor it to their situation, because I understand that the process might not allow them to probably, adopt all the recommendations. And it's also very key to actually tailor it to their situation. So I think my advice would also be to, young people. It's like a call to young people, because we as young people need to continue to, advocate for funders, to continue to, sometimes I say, make them uncomfortable, because most times if we are not pushing them, they actually might not, join us in this fight or take the required action. So I'm just calling on young people on this call, if you're to take something away, it should be intentional advocacy to funders in your community, to adopt those principles and recommendations and use them in ways that are actually beneficial. Thank you.
Thank you. And I really like this idea of making them uncomfortable. It's like poking the bear with a short stick. And I think that's really cool, because it's the idea of kind of like going crazy, and like this, a lot of good things happen when you just step out of your comfort zone. And so Thomas, is there anything else you would like to add before I ask the audience if they have any questions? And so please, people, if you have any questions for me, for Taibat, for Thomas, please write it down in the chat and we'll try our best to answer it. Thomas, if you have any advice. I think that for me, as someone who has been working with participatory grant making since I was 17, I think that my advice is just, I don't know, believe in us. And this is something I said before, which is like, it's better for you to be someone who believes in somebody else that has potential than be the person that regrets it later. And so I think just really go crazy and make sure that just teach everyone about how to do their work, but let them also let the youth be the protagonist. Oh, I love this question. Thanks, Luis. What was the point of contact for you to start working with philanthropic institutions? Taibat, do you want to go first?
It's how did you access the information or invitation? I think it all boils down to being part of a group of young people. So network is net worth for me, and those informations are being shared on this group, on this net. So I don't take it for granted. And it's just about people sharing it, and you probably applying for it, or someone that you've worked with, people recommending that, oh, Taibat would be a good fit for this, and then you just put it into it. So it's also like, I do say that you can't just leave young people to themselves, to cater for themselves. Mentorship is key, capacity building is key, and there are a lot of amazing individual out there that are ready to support young people to hold their hands and walk them through. So yes, I've benefited a lot from it. Up to this moment, I'm benefiting from it, and it's something I actually advocate a lot. Mentorship, not just assuming that we have all the knowledge, all the skills, the experience, and also willing to share this with young people, willing to build their capacity, and also willing to include and engage them. I think that is very important. Thank you.
you. And that's such an interesting question, because for me, I actually went crazy. I am part of the first Global Fund for Women's Adolescent and Girls Advisory Council. And so when I first applied, I saw like the link on the website someone shared with me on WhatsApp, and I didn't really know exactly what I would be doing. I just applied and I was genuinely honest about why I wanted to be there. I was just angry because I was a girl and my 4-year-old cousin, male cousin, was just being, treated better than I was because he was a boy. And I was just angry, and I wrote about it, and I was completely honest. And then they accepted me. And then I was like, and I just learned something new, which is participatory grant making, which was super cool. Can we just move on to the other question? I don't know if Thomas is going to be able to answer.
Yeah,
oh, go ahead.
Okay, you were saying that you should ask the question. My network is I'm having challenges with the internet, sorry about that.
The question was, how did you access the information or invitation to join philanthropic institutions?
How do I what?
How do you like the information, the access that you have had to join philanthropic institutions?
I think joining philanthropic, if I may get you clear, my colleague has talked about this a little bit. It's actually seeing that we actually ensure that we build the capacity building, and it's much more exciting at some point when you actually participating and seeing that your participations are meaningful and they are captured into issues, and they are captured into their programs. And maybe sometimes it's sometimes more exciting when maybe you give a recommendation, and at the end you see that particular recommendation captured. So the moment joining them to do that is more exciting. But it's more also frustrating when your recommendations are not captured into what they're doing. So for me, it's an exciting moment, being with them. But it's also exciting more when your capacity is built and also being around them.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here and answering questions. And for those asked questions, we'll definitely answer the other questions in the chat. So thank you so much. And I will give back the floor to Georgia. Thank you so much, everyone who joined the panel. Thanks so much. Thanks, Taibat.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Giovanna, for moderating and navigating technology challenges as always. And yeah, that was awesome. And so good to hear from you all. So we're now going to go into breakouts, which is the last, and I'd say super exciting part of this. There are going to be 3 breakouts. There will be some guidance going into the chat box now about which one to choose. But essentially we want folks to reflect on where you are in your process, particularly if you're a funder, if you're not, and just go where you feel is most interesting or relevant for you, and you'll be asked to self-select a room. So you should be able to see breakout rooms at the bottom and see which one you want to go into. Each breakout will have a member of the Youth Co-Creation Group, and it will have a funder and a member of the research team. And while you're reading the instructions that Heather's just posted in on which groups to choose, I want to invite Ola Olua, who is on our research team and has coordinated this youth co-creation group and who is the lead on youth engagement, to introduce herself, and she'll be joining a breakout as well alongside me and Ruby. Ola, do you want to come on? Are you there? I know you're having internet trouble too.
I'm here, Georgia. Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me. My name is Ola Olua Bagun. I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm a lawyer, researcher, and feminist advocate who really believes in youth-led change making. And so it was like Christmas to engage with the ECFG team in co-creating this toolkit. I really love how intentional the team has been in including and ensuring that youth voices are at the center of the toolkit. And I can't wait to jump into the breakout room to discuss my favorite part of the toolkit, which is the grounding principles that are like the foundational part of starting out on participatory and meaningful engagement with young people in funding mechanisms. Thank you, Georgia, and see you all in the breakout.
All right. It looks like we're all back in the main room. So I wanted to thank all of you for taking the time here today for what I think was a really stimulating conversation and amazing presentation and conversation in the breakout rooms. I know we had a vibrant conversation in the breakout room. I think more than anything else, we've been challenged here today. We've been challenged by young people to be more intentional and to be more deliberate about what we as funders are doing. And we've heard some powerful arguments and evidence for why we should do child and youth participation, but an important caution not to depoliticize it or just do it for the sake of doing it. And we know it's not easy. Our young co-creators have said to look at what's meaningful and challenge us to let go of control. And that's really scary. And what we hope is that this toolkit can give you a framework to do that with confidence and to allow young people to lead. And so as we close, one of the things that's really important to us is understanding how we did on this webinar for you. And so Zoe's going to launch an evaluation poll. Please take a moment to complete this poll. And the same survey will appear when you close out the webinar. So with no further ado, we're going to let you get back to your days, and just a massive and huge thank you again to everybody who made this toolkit possible. It really was a labor of love on the part of so many people, many of whom you've heard from here today, but many others who are a part of this who weren't featured on this. We thank you all for your participation, and we welcome your feedback on this toolkit. Please be in touch with us. How are you using it? What could we have done better? What could be improved? Because we want this to be a living resource for you. So thank you and have a great day.